All right, Honors American Lit, here is a quick review over Chapter 4. All right, so here we get, again, some of these rumors about Gatsby, right, that he is a bootlegger and all of these things. And I just think this is really interesting. We can just see the overall, just Nick being interested in Gatsby's life, right? So we get all these East Eggers coming to his party, and he's writing all the people who are coming to the party. Now this is interesting. We meet Cliff Springer. So it says, a man named Cliff Springer was there so often and so long that he became known as the Boarder. I doubt if he had any other home. So he becomes important a little bit later. But then it just kind of goes over more and more people that come to these parties. And all of these people came to Gatsby's house in the summer. And again, they don't have an invitation. But then, 9 o'clock one morning, late in July, Gatsby's gorgeous car lurched up the rocky drive to my door and gave out a burst of melody from its three-noted horn. And he says, "Good morning, old sport. You're having lunch with me today, and I thought we'd ride up together." Notice he didn't actually ever say anything about that to Nick before this, but they go to lunch, right? And we have some interesting characterization here of Gatsby, right? He was never quite still, always tapping his foot, the impatient opening and closing of a hand. And I'm wondering, what is he impatient for? What is happening in his life, right? Then he talks about, his car and, how it's so nice and he's so proud of it and so forth and da-da-da-da-da. Now, a couple of really important things happen on their drive to the city. So first, we have a disconcerting ride when Gatsby began leaving his elegant sentences unfinished and slapping himself indecisively on the knee of his caramel-colored suit. So suddenly, some of his original status is showing. And then he asks him, "What is your opinion of me anyhow?" Right? And so we start to get Gatsby saying, "Look, this is who I am, this is who I want to be," and so forth. And, again, the rumors, "I don't want you to get wrong idea." And then he says, here is the truth according to Gatsby. So he says, "I'm the son of some wealthy people in the Middle West, all dead now. I was brought up in America, but educated at Oxford because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. It's family tradition." So there's three things there, right? Wealthy people in the Midwest, they're dead. Brought up in America, educated at Oxford because apparently it was family tradition. Now this is interesting when it just talks about how he thinks he knows why he was possibly lying. He looked at him sideways, he hurried phrases, and with this doubt, his whole statement fell to pieces, and I wondered if there wasn't something a little sinister about him after all. Now, I love this. He says, "What part of the Middle West?" And he says, "San Francisco." Now remember, where is Nick from? He's from the Midwest, and he knows San Francisco is not in the Midwest. Then we have a fourth thing. His family died. He came into a good deal of money. And then he says he lived like a young Raja. And then, very sad, he was trying to forget something that happened long ago. And I have a little thing in there that we're going to skip. No, stop. Okay, then we have the war, and he tried to die. He accepted a commission, and then he was promoted to be a major by every allied, and every allied government gave me a decoration. Now, this is really interesting, this story in here about how he became really famous in the war. So you should read through that, but I'm not going to take the time to do that right now. Okay, but anyway, point being, and here's another one, sorry. Montenegro, gave him a little thing. And just to prove it, he just happens to have in his pocket the lovely medal from Montenegro and pulls it out and it says Major J. Gatsby for valor extraordinary. And it's just sitting there in his pocket. Okay, now this is an interesting moment for Nick because he's suddenly like, okay, it's all true. He has a picture from himself in Oxford and he's got this, and that's all he needs as proof that Gatsby is really who he was. So I thought you ought to know something about me. I didn't want you to think I was just some nobody. And this is going to be a really important idea for Gatsby, that he doesn't want to be Mr. Nobody. You see, I usually find myself among strangers because I drift here and there trying to forget the sad thing that happened to me. And you'll hear about that this afternoon. At lunch? No, I happen to find out that you're taking Miss Baker to tea. And so he's got this side plan where Miss Baker's going to tell him some sad story about Gatsby. Anyway, and they continue. So he says he wouldn't talk about it again. Now, while they are driving, a couple of really important things happen. Now, obviously, Gatsby is driving very quickly, and he gets pulled over. But all he does is he pulls out a white card from his wallet and waves it before his eyes, and suddenly he's out of the ticket. No big deal. And it turns out that he did a favor for the commissioner at some point, and so now he gets out of tickets because he's done some favors for people. And now this is interesting. On the bridge, they see some people some black African Americans being driven by a white chauffeur. So it's kind of got some of that switch of the social class based on race that you would normally see during this time period. And so that's actually really huge. And that's the idea, why is that so important? So this part right here, anything can happen. Even Gatsby can happen in this area in New York. Okay, now those are the two things that are really important that happen as they're going. But then he meets Mr. Wolfsheim, and he's a big time gambler. And we find out that he set up the 1919 World Series. And when do we find that out? Let's see a little bit later. Anyway, he gives this whole story. First off, he tries to start a business proposal with Nick, and Gatsby says, wrong guy. But then he gives him this whole story about how, his friends were killed and all of these things. I had a wrong man, he says. And so then, Wolfsheim gives some information about, Gatsby. He's a good guy. He's an Oxford man. And he says that he's known him for a long time. And then we look at his cufflinks. You guys, his cufflinks are human molars, which is real bad because it either means he's a dentist, which he's not, or they are from people that perhaps his little gangsters have collected as they've been working for him. Now, this I find very interesting. He flipped up his sleeves. Yeah, Gatsby's very careful about women. He will never so much look at a friend's wife. And this is kind of another little Mrs. Anderson giving away things. He's going to, guys. He's going to look at someone's wife. Anyway, and then we have this super awkward... Oh, yeah, here it is. He fixed the World Series in 1919. He's a gambler, and so forth. Because he asks if he's a dentist. But then we just happen to see in this not so great place, Mr. Tom Buchanan. And so Gatsby and Tom meet as Nick introduces them. And then when Nick turns around to say, hey, I've been having lunch with Mr. Gatsby, he's gone. Why is he gone? And then we get the story from Jordan of what happened. It turns out Daisy and Jordan, and we know this, are friends from back in their days in Louisville. And there were a lot of these young officers who were all just in love with Daisy because she's just so great. But Jordan comes upon Daisy and Gatsby, Jay Gatsby. And he and Daisy fall in love, and then he gets called away to the war. And she didn't, this is interesting, for a little while, she didn't play around with soldiers anymore. But then she was gay again, and she had a debut, right? All these different things. And then she met Tom Buchanan. But this is interesting. Also, yeah, this string of pearls that he gave her, that's crazy money now. $350,000 in what, 19, 18, 17? Anyway, now this is interesting too. She says, I was a bridesmaid. I came into her room half an hour before the bridal dinner and found her lying on her bed, as lovely as the June night of in her flower dress and as drunk as a monkey. She had a bottle of Sauterne, I think is how you say it, in one hand and a letter in the other. Congratulate me, she said. Never had a drink before, but oh, how I do enjoy it. And then she says, here, dearest. And she hands out the string of pearls. Take them downstairs and give them back to whoever they belong to. Tell them all Daisy's changed her mind. Say Daisy's changed her mind. And so she's in hysterics, right? Because she's changed her mind. And apparently she got a letter. And that letter has made it so that she is not so sure to marry Tom. So she wouldn't let go of the letter. So she got in the tub. They tried to clean her up, because she's supposed to get married. And the whole letter came to pieces in the tub. But they gave her spirits of ammonia, put ice on her forehead, hooked her back into her dress, and half an hour later, they walked out of the room. The pearls were around her neck, and the incident was over. Next day at 5 o'clock, she married Tom without so much of a shiver and started off 3 months' trip to the South Seas. So there's something, a letter, and we find out, of course, it's from, you can guess, Gatsby, saying, don't marry him. I saw them in Santa Barbara, and them is Tom and Daisy. I thought I'd never seen a girl so mad about her husband, so in love. And yet, a week after I left Santa Barbara, Tom ran into a wagon on the Ventura Road one night and ripped off the front wheel of his car. The girl who was with him got into the papers too because her arm was broken. She was one of the chambermaids in the Santa Barbara hotel. He is a cheating man. Started right away. They lived in Chicago and so forth. The first time she heard Gatsby's name was the night that Nick was at their home, and she was interested in knowing who they were talking about. And then this is when Jordan put together the fact that this is the man that she had seen Daisy with. Then we get a really interesting thing. We find out Gatsby has moved into this home just so that he can be near Daisy. And he throws all these parties so that, she might just come sometime. But he wants to know if you'll invite Daisy to your house some afternoon and let him come over. So some kind of tea or something. And this is all crazy, the way that they discuss it. So, and she says, I think he half expected her to wander in on one of her parties one night, but she never did. So he has to look around for her. And apparently Jordan was the first one that he met that knew her. Now he turns and he's more interested in Jordan, right? And Daisy have to have something in her life. Does she want to see Gatsby? Oh, she doesn't need to know that that's what it is. Now, this is important in Nick's life, right? We passed a barrier of dark trees and then the facade of 59th Street. A block of delicate pale light beamed down into the park. Unlike Gatsby and Tom Buchanan, I had no girl whose disembodied face floated along the dark cornices of blinding signs, and so I drew up the girl beside me, tightening my arms. Her wan, scornful mouth smiled, and so I drew her up again, closer this time to my face. They kiss. All right, so we've got a lot of things happening, a ton of information being dumped in Chapter 4. Gatsby and Daisy have a history. But Daisy's married to Tom, and Tom's cheating on Daisy with Myrtle, who's married to George. So it all gets very confusing and convoluted. Hopefully you were able to follow all of that, and you feel like you've learned some more about Chapter 4.